candid conversations, unfiltered opinions, and humor with Abeg Vex podcast.
Hi, welcome everybody. We have today Julia DeNey. Julia is a former educator and entrepreneur, and her journey is very inspiring. And we will have the pleasure of having her talk about all the great things that she is doing in the world, because we all can make an impact, you know. Hi, Julia. Welcome.
Hi, thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you for being here. So, Julia, please, could you tell us about your entrepreneurial journey, how you got there, how you found the need for what you do? Because guys and ladies and gentlemen, you know, everybody in between, this is quite exciting. So, Julia, let us know.
Yeah, I definitely never thought I'd be an entrepreneur, but definitely just finding a need kind of led me down the path. Okay. So I was majoring in fashion design at Cornell University and separately started volunteering at an autism preschool, actually, where a bunch of the educators and the parents would bring up to me a lot of the sensory challenges and clothing challenges their kids faced when I said I was majoring in fashion design, which led me to kind of begin this independent study just into adaptive clothing for kids with disabilities, especially on the sensory side. And when I graduated in 2020, straight into the pandemic, I ended up going and working in special education at a school really similar to that one I worked at with a lot of autistic children. That was kind of a big need during the pandemic and kind of my other love and interest I'd fallen in love with. And I really got to see a really great need for more sensory tools, more sensory friendly clothing, which led me to this entrepreneurial path of creating a clothing brand for these kids specifically.
This is beautiful. So when we talk about sensory needs for children with autism, for somebody who may not understand the need for a good sensory clothing article, what is that? It's like, okay, that it's just clothes. You put it on and you go on with your life. Why do you need a clothing or a piece of clothing that doesn't irritate you? What is that?
Yeah, I think it is something that's initially hard to understand if you don't experience it. You can put on any clothing and walk out the door. But if you think about it, we all have senses. We all take in sensory information. And I think what's different is when people process that information in a way that you wouldn't. So, you know, all of our clothes have tags in them and you may not even notice yours. You might occasionally notice it, be a little bothered, but that can actually be something that is really painful for someone with sensory differences. So it really feels like the tag is cutting into them and cutting their skin. And so it's not this minor irritation that you can just ignore and go about your day. Like it really is intolerable to wear, or at a minimum, like fills your cup for the day. Like you can't handle any other annoyance, any other demand, any new information. So it can really inhibit learning, really affect behavior. And that's just one of the examples. You know, it could be the seams in their clothes are rubbing them. The fabric is too rough or doesn't allow them to move the right way, and that overloads their system. So there's a lot of different elements specific to clothing that can really be problematic and even painful for someone who processes that information differently.
So what are the telltale signs, you've mentioned quite a few of them, that parents may be aware of, even if we do know that the autism spectrum is a spectrum that is
totally
very, right? So even if somebody's not diagnosed clinically, what are the signs that a parent can maybe look out for, and maybe an indication that, you know what, my child does have a clothing sensitivity or sensory overload when it comes to clothing?
Yeah, and it is something that is and can be totally independent of any sort of other diagnosis. You could just have a sensory processing difference or a sensitivity. So definitely want to be mindful of that. But yeah, I think if you noticed a shift in behavior from when they're not wearing any clothes, say in the morning, or if they're at home, they prefer being, you know, clothesless, running around. If they then have like an increase in behavior, they're more irritable or have more meltdowns or tantrums when they are then dressed, and specifically dressed maybe in like nicer clothing or clothing that's more uncomfortable, you can kind of notice that behavior, and it may link back to sensory. It may not actually be, you know, like a behavior problem that needs to be addressed. And I think a lot of it, you can tell immediately, like if they're really picky about what they're putting on, or if you put a certain new shirt on them and they immediately take it off and throw it off, and it's hard for them to keep on their clothing or hard to keep them on and be happy. I think that's going to be a big indicator. I think you'll also see it in other sensory situations, and our clothing address some of these too, but you can notice sensitivities if you're out and you walk into Walmart where it's really crowded and loud and they immediately cover their ears, or they have a really hard time sitting in that situation and staying in the cart and just want to leave. It could be sensory overload from that environment. So something that we add into our clothing is something to help with that sensory experience all around. So we have hoodies that help block sound just with the material if you pull up the hood, or shirts that have compression. It feels like a tight hug. So if you think about like a weighted blanket on the go. So some of these other considerations can be met through clothing, even if you don't initially notice a specific sensory issue specifically with the clothing.
Wow, that is awesome. A weighted blanket on the go is something that I feel maybe I need.
Yeah.
Who doesn't want a nice hug on the go?
Right, exactly.
So is there a particular fabric that, since this is your expertise, that you find meets more of a sensory need than others? So we talk about the texture, right? Denim is rough, right?
Yeah.
Leather's rough. Even pleather is rough. So is there a particular fabric that you work with that you feel like, or you do see, because if you've experimented and you have parents give you feedback, that is more welcoming and reduces a lot of those hyper sensitivity?
Yeah, as a whole, really what I've learned is it can be so individual, which does make it hard, especially on our end, just trying to offer a variety of things, because so many kids do have like a specific preference to one material. I think as a whole, and as you're just trying to figure it out and figure out your child, natural materials are typically way more preferred. So think about like breathable cottons, bamboos, and other rayon / like viscose fabrics. I think anything that's going to be more breathable, lighter, more on the natural side typically does well. And that can, be mixed with different things and have a feel. And I think ultimately like that hand feel, you'll be able to pick it up and feel like if it's soft, if it's not. Cotton can be a rough fabric. So I think that does vary, but as a whole, you really want to look for that like stretch and breathability so that they don't feel confined. I think that's what makes denim so hard, is the material itself is rough and then you're pretty confined in your pair of pants. As you move, they bunch up. It's hard to move in them. If you're sitting cross-legged, it really can hurt inside your knees. So you want to make sure the fabric is like moving with them and causing as little barrier to movement as possible.
Beautiful. So when we talk about seams, right? Seams are basically the joints.
Yep.
To make the clothes, right? So how do you hide a seam when you're processing clothing? Because it's part of the natural process, right? And some of the threads are not the softest, right? When you're constructing a garment. So how do you hide that? Because I do see some companies trying to accommodate the sensitivity of children by printing on labels as opposed to having a tag, right? So how do you hide a seam?
Yeah, the tag is definitely the easier solution. We do the print on also. Seams is so hard because, as you said, they are a necessity. You can't just have no seams or it'd be a flat piece of fabric, which definitely makes it challenging. But I think where I kind of went with it and with a lot of feedback was just making sure the seams are flat so that on the inside, there isn't that extra bulk. There isn't something that's rubbing around, or if you're sitting down and you press on it. So we use all flat seams, and that way the machine just kind of uses overlapping threads to kind of merge two pieces of fabric together rather than folding them together, sewing it flat, and then you have the extra fabric in the middle. So you'll actually see on all our garments like all the stitching on the outside, because that machine puts the same stitching on the inside and outside because it's what's holding those two flat pieces of fabric together. And I think that's been the best way. I hope textiles innovations continue to evolve, and maybe one day we can have even more invisible seams. But for now, looking for those flat seams is a huge, and even the finishes, like making sure it's hemmed where it's flat, and just pockets are stitched down so that nothing's bunching up on the inside as a whole. But yeah, seams are definitely a huge challenge, and it's definitely something that we continue to push back on our factory with, making sure every seam's flat. When they say, oh, well, that one just can't be, but that's okay. And I'm like, nope, we got to figure it out together. We got to make them flat.
I love it. I love it. Absolutely. Yeah. So the fashion innovators of the world, let's keep going.
Let's keep going. Yeah.
Right? More of us need help. So what are the kinds of feedback you've gotten from parents who have heightened sensitivity kids that have tried on your clothing and it's been successful. What are those feedback and what has that been like for you?
Yeah, the feedback is honestly the best part. I love when I get more than just we love it. I mean, I love those too, but I love when parents really feel compelled to send in a story that gets to like motivate me for the rest of the week. We've had parents, reach out and say, the day after their hoodie arrived, that their son was able to eat in the cafeteria for the first time, or they were able to, go on the field trip with their peers. And all those stories just mean so much because it's just such a tangible impact on someone's day that we were able to have and I was able to have through a design and something I created in my mind, which is just crazy to me. Other things, especially like our compression t-shirt, that kind of hug on the go. It's been cool to hear, parents that say he has a hard time going even a few minutes without running over and really needing a deep squeeze for me and deep hug for me. And with the t-shirt, it was dropped down to a few times that day or once an hour, something a little more tangible where he's able to go off and do other things, do an activity, go learn. And he's not so distracted by being dysregulated and always needing to run back and need a hug. So stories like that are honestly the best. And I'm always so excited to connect with customers and always make sure they have my email so I can directly get those messages.
That's awesome. I mean, how has that feedback and those messages helped you on your journey and even working more to meet children's needs?
Yeah, it's definitely a huge motivation to keep going and honestly, even innovate on our current designs and then also begin thinking about all the other designs we could create for different sensory needs. But even as we work on our next round of hoodies, it's been cool to take some of that feedback and say, hey, we love it, but it'd be cool if it had pockets, or it'd be amazing if this had thumb holes. And those are such tangible edits that I'm then able to take and put into our next round of production. So it not only really directly impacts what we're going to do and what the company is going to become, but also just that motivation for me to keep going and say, okay, this is one person's story who found it, bought it, was able to reach out, took the time, but that means that there's, thousands of other kids that are having that same experience or could have that same experience if we get our product out to them. So it's just a huge motivation for me to keep going, not only in the product innovation, but also just on the entrepreneurial side of trying to grow the business.
Amazing. Amazing that you actually take into account the feedback from the parents to product modify so that your heart is in a good place. So that is awesome. So let's talk about care, right? Caring for these clothing, especially with the weighted hoodie and the weighted clothing, because weighted blankets are not the easiest to launder and care for. So how is that process is that a specialized care need, like, dry clean only or things of that nature?
Yeah, so it was a big important point for me to want to make sure that our clothes were as easy to launder for parents as possible, especially kids are messy, kids are chaotic, your life as a parent is chaotic. You don't need to be hand washing their wardrobe every night, especially if it's something they want to wear a lot. So definitely the weighted can be really hard. And that's what I realized from weighted blankets, which is actually why I decided to do a t-shirt where it's actually compression that gives that hug rather than actual weight. It just gives a very similar sensory experience. And that way, the material is more like anything you'd find in athletic wear, a little thicker than that, but a very similar material. So it can actually go in the wash. Very similarly with our hoodie, the material that helps block sound is kind of what gives the hood a weighted feel because that material is weighted and heavy. But it's actually a material that I specifically found that is washable. So while we do say to wash on gentle and hang dry if possible, make sure the magnets are closed on the hoodie, you can actually wash them in the machine, which is just so important, I think, for parents as a whole and honestly anyone's like ease of life. I know it's hard for me to find the time to like hand wash your few pieces and remember those are the ones that have to be hand washed. So it was definitely something that was really important and really became a team effort and took a lot of sourcing and design innovation and find a way to not do it with those kind of weighted beads that are really hard to wash in the machine.
They are. We have a few. They are hard to care for.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your journey as an educator, because you did have that part, which really brought you front and center to, yes, you did volunteer, you saw it, but also it was like an added layer of responsibility when you actually did see the irritation that certain clothing items were causing the children. So how much of your experience in the classroom would you say added to that empathy of making sure that things were done?
Yeah, I think a huge part of it. I think that school that I volunteered at and in college, I connected with a few families that were my models, but to me, it still felt very small in a certain way. It was very localized. And it really wasn't until I left the state, went to a totally new school, started teaching at a school full of kids, that I really realized how widespread and how greatly needed it was. So I'd definitely say my journey as an educator, greatly shaped actually taking the leap and turning this into a company. Especially, I remember one of my first days teaching, you're just trying to get the lay of the land. You're like an assistant, you're watching what everyone's doing. But we were with this one group, and there was this girl in this class who was always a great listener. This was maybe, a few days in, but I was like, she's always done really well, follows the directions. And she was not lining up. And I was just watching her, and we were like, why is she not listening to line up? And she was sitting on the floor, pulling at the tag on the inside of her shirt. One of those ones on the side that's like a textbook, has all the different languages, has everything, all the pages. And I just looked at her and I was like, oh my gosh, she cannot hear even the directions we are giving her because she's so distracted by this really painful thing in her shirt. So I just walked over and actually cut it out of her shirt. And then I was like, hey, they're all lining up. And she just looked around and immediately lined up perfectly in line with her friends. And it just, to me, gave me that hands-on moment and tangible impact where I was like, okay, this is actually greatly affecting people's ability to learn and move about their lives. And it's not a small problem. It's not localized to, Ithaca, New York, where I went to college. It really is something that people worldwide are struggling with. And a lot of people don't see. I don't think other educators in the room who don't have kind of that sensory background would have necessarily noticed that. They would have thought she was just not listening. She was not paying attention. They needed to talk to her about listening to directions on the first time, whatever it is. But really, that's not her problem. She has no problem listening to directions the first time if she can focus on it and not the dysregulation or the painful sensory input she's getting.
Absolutely. That you made such a great point, because there's so much that goes into a child, even adult learners being distracted, right? So everybody has different learning styles. And if your learning style is interrupted, or your learning in general is interrupted by an annoying stimuli or painful stimuli, it throws you off. That's all you can focus on. So as opposed to always being behavioral, what is the thing? Let's not look for, that Band-Aid or that paintbrush to just lump everything. What is that one thing? And good on you for, discovering that and, going for it. So for the tag, did you have to send a note to the mom to let mom know you cut off the tag?
I didn't, because it actually wasn't the tag on the back that has any important information. It's the tag on the side that is a regulation thing, especially for big company like Target. I think sure it was from Target. So, they have stores in every country. So they need to have this tag that just says oh, this is safe for a child or whatever it says, but in 100 different languages. So they have to put this huge thing in it. So I just cut it out, and I was like, no one reads it. No one looks at it. No one would notice. If I saw mom at drop off, I probably would have mentioned it, but I honestly forgot I even did it that day by the end of the day, because it was first period of the day. And no one said anything, because it really isn't important. It is for the federal regulations and all these things you have to have, but it's not for the wearer. It's not for the user.
I promise mom did not notice. You're fine.
Oh yeah. I was I honestly didn't even think about it until you said that. I was like, wow, maybe I should have told her, but it just never even crossed my mind. You go about your day and then you're teaching. You're it was such a minor thing. But to me, it's something that at the end of the day, I went home and was reflecting on the day, and I was like, wow, this is why I need to start the company. But in the scheme of the teaching day, it was not a huge event.
Absolutely. I agree. And I think this is a learning moment for everybody, educators, parents, siblings, guardians. If you buy that piece of clothing for a child or anybody, for yourself, right? If you are not depending on that tag to tell you what heat to iron that piece of clothing,
Right.
it's okay to rip it off. And especially if a child is pulling at it, to you, you may ignore it if your sensitivity level is not as high as that child. You'll just ignore it. It's
Right.
easier to say, just rip it off, take it off.
Yeah.
Just take it off. It doesn't matter. So my question back in the education aspect of things, because you had the knack of having to turn your observation into a business. Okay.
Yeah.
Starting a business is not easy.
No.
Okay?
Definitely not.
Absolutely it is not. It takes guts. Somebody recently said to me that if you notice something, it takes a special kind of crazy to be an entrepreneur. And they're right.
It does. It's so true.
And they're right. So just for all the educators out there in the world that, they spend a lot of time with, children and their students. We were just joking about this before we came on the call, that as educators, we tend to get attached, right?
Yeah.
So what is your one thing you can say to your fellow educators, be it in grade school, nursery school, high school, university level, that they've seen a problem and they know they can address it with their expertise? What would the encouragement be about, stepping out and doing that thing like you're doing, starting that clothing brand that, serves a population of people that are usually kind of like almost ignored?
Yeah, I definitely say it's a scary leap, but I think there's steps you can take before you hit kind of that cliff where you're like, okay, now I have to go all in on this business or all in on this idea. And I'd say just take the first step, start reaching out to people, other entrepreneurs, other people in your kind of sector of whatever product you're thinking about or thing you think would be helpful, and just start getting advice. Just start asking their stories, how they got started, and see if there's kind of little ways to kind of begin that journey for yourself. Because I think you also need to trust your expertise. I think as educators, as you said, we get attached. Like, these kids or these students or even adults, if you're teaching them so well, you know them very personally. And if you really know, like, you have this idea and you have something that would help, but you don't think you could do it or you're not sure how to do it, you got to trust that I think as educators, we are in such a unique position. I think it's a job like no other. And I think a lot of times you feel undervalued in that, but you need to know in your heart and in yourself that you know the value and you know you're really smart and you're really capable and you know the ins and outs of your classrooms and your students. And if you see a solution to something they're struggling with, you are uniquely capable of creating that solution, because there's no one else who's going to work with them every day. Another entrepreneur or a student majoring in entrepreneurship wants to start a company. They don't know your student like you know them. If you haven't been in the classroom, you haven't been with them, no one else has that skill set to make the perfect solution to that problem. So you need to trust in that and know that even if someone else is a big business person and you're not a business person, that really doesn't mean anything if you don't know the person who's going to be using the product and you don't know the problem. So trust that you know, and take that leap and just start reaching out to people. Just start taking those baby steps that will build that confidence behind you. Because I promise, other educators and other early stage entrepreneurs will all have your back, because they know that if you're building this product because you've been there and seen the problem, it's going to be successful and could have a really great impact.
Absolutely. So well said. Bravo. So well said. And this thing about the big business people, oh, I don't know business that well, or, the big business people are depending on your expertise.
Oh yeah, 100%.
You are the brain of the operation. You have the knowledge, you have the experience, right? People are willing to invest in somebody who has the experience, and you do. So don't sell yourself short. You are very valued. You're very valuable, and we need you. We depend on you now.
Oh, totally.
Yes.
Yeah, business is something that can be learned. You can learn the business side. You can hire consultants to manage your finances for you. You can find these solutions,
Right.
but a business could not operate without your specific expertise and your expert in the space and in the problem that you're solving. So know that you are the most valuable. The whole business side is learnable, it's replaceable. You can find people for that. That should not be what intimidates you, because the hardest thing for those people is finding the person that knows how to solve the problem, and that's you.
Absolutely. Everything Julia said. I love it. So, Julia, for parents who are listening who have children on the autism spectrum or who are on the spectrum themselves, and they're interested in purchasing your product, which I should ask, is your company just focused on children's clothing at this time, or do you have adult clothing as well?
We do have adult sizes too. It's something we've been slowly expanding into, partly because so many parents wanted the clothing also with their child, and also so many kids that, at 10 or 11 were already in adult sizes. And I was like, okay, we need to just start helping meet everyone's needs. So slowly you'll see that I slowly, like each production run when I'm able to, add in another style in adult sizes. But yeah, definitely we have like key styles for adults too, like our sound reducing hoodie and our joggers. So you can get like a whole matching sensory friendly set.
Nice. So where can they purchase your product?
Yes, you can go to sensoryclothes.com. Also, if you find us on social media as sensational_you, it's always like linked in our bio and everything's right there and really easy. And also on our website, you'll always find my email. So if you have questions about the products or about sizing or anything that I can help with, like I answer every email and every chat on the website. So feel free to message.
I love it. We are going to make sure that this show notes has everything Julia related. So how to reach her, her website, the clothing. If you have any questions, like she said, please reach out. There are people, a lot of adults that, again, like she stated, you don't have to be clinically diagnosed. However, you do know how you feel when you put on certain clothing article. If you feel like any of this sensory needs speaks to you, reach out. Again, she's an entrepreneur that takes in the feedback from her customers. Yeah. If you are, an adult that has the sensory need, however, you don't see anything in your size, communicate. As she's innovating and producing more and more inclusiveness of size would be there. So please reach out. If you have anybody in your life, say a family member, a friend, who may have children that are struggling with sensory sensitivity when it comes to clothing, please send them this episode. Please communicate with them about Julia's company and, help somebody. Because again, if we're comfortable, we're able to function, right? Going to the grocery store undisturbed may just be something that most people don't think about. But for parents with a child diagnosed with autism, that is an adventure, right? Yeah. And, couple that with clothing that are not comfortable. That is something that no parent wants to really go through, especially knowing that their child is uncomfortable. So please share. Please let us know what you think. And if you're an educator, Julia said it best, or whatever industry you're in. If you have an idea and you have an idea of solving a problem that is very common, business can be learned. Your brain is needed, right? Only 100%. Only you can solve it. So step out. It may not be easy. However, this is why I absolutely love this platform, because you get to find people that you can relate with. Reach out. A lot of us who have started companies that did it on our own and had to call for information and found information along the way. We are willing to help somebody who has a vision, because I want to be that person for somebody that I wish I had.
Right. 100%. Yeah. Make your life easier. Like, I would love to make everyone's life easier.
It would be so much fun for all of us to just, come up with these innovative ideas to make everybody's life livable, not necessarily easier, but livable. So please let us know what you think. Share this. I'll reach out to Julia. We'll make sure everything is there. So you don't have to, what was the name of that company again? No, we'll make it available to you. All right. So Julia, what can you leave us with? What golden nuggets do you have?
Yes. I was going to say that one thing too we didn't touch on that I love sharing too, especially around inclusivity, is that these products that are made across the board, not just ours, but to solve a specific problem or to help someone with a specific disability or challenge really are for everyone, and it really benefits everyone. You know, I've heard people use the example of like the electric toothbrush was for people who didn't have the dexterity to brush their teeth, but now everyone loves them. So in that same vein, like I love sharing, you know, to please buy anything that you would like to and support that, because then it becomes commonplace. It becomes more accessible, more affordable. And even something as like our sound reducing hoodie, you may not be bothered by sound, but it does have an eye mask that can pull down for a sensory break. And you know what that's great for? Sleeping on an airplane. Like they have these really universal benefits and really benefit everyone. And it's just such the perfect example of how inclusion and understanding others benefits everyone. So even if you're listening to this and you're like, well, I don't know anyone with autism, or, you know, I've never struggled with sensory, there's still such a great place for products that are made for people that do struggle, even if you don't. Even if you don't hate tags, it can just be comfortable not to have one. So all of these things really can be for everyone, and that's across the board. So just being more mindful of what other people struggle with and making sure that in your daily life, you know, you're being mindful of that, and in your purchases, you're being mindful of that to help make the whole planet more inclusive.
Again, very well said. Very well said. So everything Julia said. So let's just be mindful. Mindfulness and empathy goes hand in hand. So even if you feel you may not be struggling, a lot of us have something I've noticed about humans. We've learned to band-aid things that we just for societal digestion, we suffer in silence, right?
Yeah.
But again, even if you don't feel like you're suffering in silence, again, to make it accessible, to make it a mainstay so that it's not so exclusive or only people that. No, we would like to see such product in the big box stores. We'd like to see such product very commonly sold everywhere, because again, it doesn't have that alienation that is very unnecessary. So thank you, Julia.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. So thank you everybody for listening. Please reach out if you have any questions. All of our information is going to be in the show notes. Explore to see what she has available. If you have any feedback, like Julia has said, she welcomes feedback. Please provide feedback so she can continue to make the impact and be the shining star that she is.
I love it. Thank you so much.
All right. Take care of yourself, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to Abeg Vex podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review. It really helps us out. We'd love to hear your thoughts and continue the discussion. So join us on social media or drop us a message. Until next time, keep exploring, stay curious, and keep pushing the boundaries of your world.